Welcome everyone, this is your host Abraham L. Jaguar, a professional game master. First of all, this channel is proudly sponsored by Detri Studios, the publishers and developers of Dames of Asstoria, a tabletop role-playing game where you play as monster girls experiencing high adventure in a world that doesn't fully accept them. They have recently released Daughters of Lamb. This is a pay-what-you-want tabletop RPG where you get to play as cybernetic nuns with guns, looking for the missing pieces of their AI god. You will find it in their website. The link will be in the description and in the pinned comment. This channel is also proudly sponsored by the Red Room Publishing. Please check out their store for exclusive tabletop RPG products and check out their recent release, Final Frontier. This is a streamlined sci-fi tabletop RPG where you get to explore space for justice, for profit, or perhaps for both. You will find it in their website. The link will be in the description and in the pinned comment as well. So, today I am going to address the recent. A moment, please. Let me maximize myself. There we go. I am going to address the recent Traveler Second Edition Secrets of the Ancients session. If you haven't seen our ongoing campaign, please check out the playlist in the description below. There were a couple of two very interesting, I would say, important things as well concerning the freedom of the player characters to take action, and of course, for the players to interact with the game world. And this is through the freedom of using your skills and your choices, the freedom of choice. What do I mean by this? When it comes to skills, whether you're using a system of random character generation or when you get to customize the skills that your character is proficient with, you want those skills to be useful, of course. You're not going to take a bunch of skills that you rarely use. So I think there is a bad tendency when it comes to tabletop RPGs and modules where the game master limits the creativity of the players as their player characters by calling a very specific skill for a particular task. Of course, there are going to be very specific tasks, like, for example, if you want to knit something, maybe you need to knit some fabric, sweater, or whatnot. Yeah, that's a very specific skill, right? Or maybe you want to build some tools, right? Perhaps tools that combine metal and wood. That's also a bit more specific. But I think those are rare exceptions, and there is still room to employ other skills, perhaps to substitute those skills with others, or at the very least get some minor bonuses during that particular task of crafting, creating, building something. It could be anything. So you may have noticed in the session and in all of the sessions that I run for any tabletop RPG that I always call for whatever attribute or skill the players require in a particular task, some special characteristic or skill that they consider applies to the situation. Although in some cases, in more specific situations, I usually give them a choice, such as roll strength or constitution with this skill or this other skill. And now the players have the choice. But in a lot of cases, especially when it comes to semi complex systems such as Traveler, not complexity in the execution of the mechanics, but rather the depth of the nuances of the many skills that you can choose for your character or that are randomly determined during the life path process. there are so many skills, and many of those could also be applied to the situation. And this also creates a sharp contrast or distinction of what makes tabletop RPGs superior when it comes to immersion when compared to video games. In video games, if it is not programmed into the video game, you cannot do it. You could say that in a deeper level, many video games have many multiple choices like A, B, C, D, E. And if you do not engage with those particular routes that have been programmed into a specific situation, then you simply cannot do it. Like you have to do it as it has been programmed into the game. But when it comes to tabletop role playing games, there is great freedom. Let's say that your character, you're playing a wizard. Yeah, a wizard that is not exactly very athletic, not very fit. And he reaches this part that is pretty high, and he cannot jump, he cannot climb, he cannot get on top of the platform, whatever. He cannot climb up the small hill. In a video game, unless it is programmed, you cannot summon, maybe you're, like I said, you're a wizard and you can summon some sort of extra planar being like a demon or a whatever, right? An elemental. You cannot have that creature assist you unless it is programmed into the game. So what if in a tabletop role playing game, you can do that. You can summon a creature and order the creature for it to carry you and lift you and place you on top of the platform. Or perhaps you could grab onto the creature from behind and the creature can climb. If it's like a really big muscular monster, you climb on the back of the monster and now you can go to the top of whatever it is that you are trying to reach. Because you know your limitations, you are not exactly fit in that regard, right? The same thing applies to skills. If you know how to use a particular sword or weapon, there are many somewhat different weapons that you more or less know how to handle. All sorts of sword and axe variations. They're not exactly the same, but you are somewhat skilled in their use, right? When it comes to crafting, if you know how to shape something, to perhaps sculpt something, maybe because of your perception, your dexterity of the fingers, your knowledge of the tools, you could also make something related to carpentry, right? So it's all about that freedom. That's why I highly recommend that when your players are interacting with the game world and you decide to call upon a role, instead of giving them like a very restrictive skill, like roll intelligence, knowledge, architecture, right? Maybe they have some other type of knowledge. They have knowledge, culture, knowledge, engineering. They could actually substitute that. And if a modifier needs to be applied, just do it on the game master side. Don't tell them the target number. Let them make the roll, choosing the attribute and the skill that they want. They give you the result. And depending on the skill, depending on how you consider things to proceed, maybe they don't even need to tell you more or less the skill. We are all supposed to be mature players. We're not going to be cheating. Then you can continue or complete the task resolution, right? You don't need to check on them to see if they are telling the truth or not, or if they wanted to cheat, they could pretty much add a lot of modifiers. If you're playing online or in person, they are not showing you the dice rolls. They could apply all sorts of bullshit modifiers, but like I said, that's in the case of cheaters. You don't play with cheaters. You play with decent people, players. And so it's perfectly fine when it comes to letting them choose the skills that they want to use. That way, the player doesn't feel like the game master is not validating this skill that I chose for my character during character creation, or during character creation, I obtained the randomly obtained this bunch of skills, and now I never get to use them. Now the player has a chance to choose the skills that apply to a particular situation. So either I would recommend that you either, like I said, give them a few choices, like roll dexterity or intelligence with any skill of your choosing, or roll dexterity and intelligence and either sculpting or engineering, right? And now the player has a choice now, depending on the situation, right? In the case of sculpting and engineering, maybe it's a machine of sorts that relies a lot on pulleys and ropes and fiddling around with all sorts of stone and wooden pieces or metal pieces. It could apply. But moving on from that, freedom of choice. Many modules and tabletop RPGs sometimes create this horrible bad habit, a bias, you could say, where the railroads are so restrictive that if the players do not follow a particular path, the module doesn't proceed forward, or it could be ending up in disastrous circumstances. But the freedom of choice is very important. Again, this is not a video game. In a video game, unless it is programmed into the game, you cannot take different choices. You cannot choose to go to this other place instead of this other place. You cannot choose to skip the event, those unskippable events that are about to occur, the boss fights, the whatever. You cannot choose to take another route. You cannot choose to go off rails. But because tabletop RPGs are supposed to be a fictional reality, that is, it's supposed to be quite realistic when it comes to the implementation of the decisions that the players can take in the session. You could clearly see that both Josh and Miguel, they identified that the course of the situation was leading them into a somewhat complex scenario. So they immediately started to make plans. They started to, of course, this is a bit of spoilers. If you haven't seen the part, please watch it. But just to keep it a bit more spoiler free, they decided to distance themselves from that situation that was unfolding. They started to make their plans. And now, I can tell you right now, this is not going to ruin the adventure. They, at the very least, they avoided two two situations that could have been quite troublesome. Quite troublesome. That's why a lot of players that do not understand this freedom of choice, they take a look at modules and they think, oh no, those modules, they are forcing you to go through all of the encounters. And no, 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 no. When you look at a module, it should be an opportunity for the players to interact with that module and work their will upon that module according to the limitations of their player characters. Of course, they are not going to be skilled in everything or at everything. They have only a limited set of skills, tools, powers, abilities, etc. But they have that plethora, right? They could even use those spells, abilities, devices, and whatnot in many tabletop RPGs according to their own creativity. Like in the typical fantasy game that on video game, where you cannot use your ice spell to create an ice bridge, even though you are creating like blocks of ice and whatnot, because it is not programmed. You could try it in tabletop RPGs. Maybe a penalty is applied. Maybe there is some other circumstance that occurs because of using the spell in such an unconventional way. And you also need to keep in mind the duration, the range of the spell, but the possibility is there. You could even combine the use of that spell with other objects, other magical items to accomplish your objectives, reach your goals. So in that traveler session, in the case of Josh, he immediately thought about contacting this pilot, keeping that pilot close at hand just in case she was necessary, and they did make use of the pilot. In the case of Miguel, he was paying a lot of attention when it comes to the social entanglement that was about to occur. And he also I don't remember if it was Josh or Miguel first. Perhaps it was both. I think it was Josh first and then Miguel. They decided to examine that place that looked like it was actually the site that they were looking for, but it turned out that it was something very different. And if they were just like, oh well, that's it, right? Let's try doing that because I am certain that object is to be used in a very particular way. But no, they thought, what is it if this is something else? Let's be more cautious and examine everything first. That's why roleplay is very cautious. That is, you can be very cautious when role playing. You don't need to ask questions to the game master. Game master, is there any danger? Game master, excuse me, let me break the immersion completely. Pull ourselves out of the fantasy. Game master, can you tell me if the situation is dangerous or troublesome? No, I look around and examine the strange object in front of me, keeping my distance, looking at it from afar, right? Looking at the object from afar, if you wish. If that doesn't produce any results, you can employ tools, various tools. Perhaps you decide to shoot the object, perhaps you decide to poke it, perhaps you decide to throw a rock at it, whatever. But first, excellent reckon excellent investigation on the part of Josh and Miguel. First, looking at the object from afar, trying to ascertain the nature of that object. I don't remember their exact wording, but I look at the object and the site around me to see if there is anything unusual. I gave them the choice to make, I think it was intelligence. I called it intelligence and any skill that applies to the situation, that they consider it applies to the situation. And so their role was made. And now they determined that that object was part of a security system. As simple as that. So I hope this video was informative and entertaining. Thank you so much for watching this video and thank you so much to those of you that are going the extra mile to support the channel. If anyone else wishes to further support the channel, consider joining as a member using the super thanks button. Like, subscribe, take a look at the information in the description and in the pinned comment. This has been your host, Abraham L. Jaguar, professional game master. And remember, in tabletop role-playing games, it's not about what you want your characters to do. It's about what your characters are doing. Once again, thank you and see you later.